My name is Sherry Steiner. It is December 23rd, 2021 in Gainesville, Florida. And I'm interviewing Jane Morris, Janemorris. Hi, Jane.
Hi, Sherry.
Thank
you for interviewing me. I appreciate this.
I'm so glad. Please tell me a little bit about your personal background, where you were born, where you grew up, your family, things like that.
Okay. I was born in Massachusetts. I'm a New Englander through and through, even though I've been in Florida for 30 some years. And it started out in a very small town. My father was a doctor there. My mother stayed home, worked from home. And it was a privileged background, relatively speaking. We got to do a lot of fun things. I loved all the seasons. And we got to be beach all summer on Cape Cod for the first 10 years of my life and played in the snow all winter. And I started out as a healthy, active, strong person. I was the youngest of 3 daughters. Yes, the overview of my story is that I started out strong, and it was when I was 27 that I got sick with the illness called myalgic encephalomyelitis, and is commonly known as chronic fatigue syndrome or chronic fatigue immune dysfunction syndrome. And that completely changed my life. So at the age of 27 was the turning point when I had to completely regroup and learn a lot of lessons about how to live a very different life than the one I had been learning and training for my entire life before then. So all my life I was very, very interested in art. I always wanted to be drawing and painting and making things out of paper mache or clay or fall leaves. We'd collect and make things out of them. I mean, anything you could do with your hands, my friends and I would do. And I was able to go to Tufts University outside of Boston, and then went to the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, which is a wonderful art school that I had actually in high school. I was able to start going into Boston on Saturday classes they had at the Museum of Fine Arts for high school students. And it was just a huge thrill. I had one of my best high school friends and I would go in on it was about a 2-hour trip from our town. I'm not telling this whole story in a very straight line, but when I was 10, my family moved from the very small little New Englandy village to a town not too far away called Stoughton. And Stoughton had access to Boston. It was about 20 miles closer to Boston and about 25 miles from Boston. But if we took the bus to the trolley line to the subway, and all the way in town, as we said, into Boston, and then took the subway to a different line and took that line all the way out to the Museum of Fine Arts. It was a 2-hour trip starting early Saturday morning, but it was just the most fun. It was so exciting. We just felt so big and grown and sophisticated and cool doing that. And we'd have our class and then we'd run around the museum. It was like our playground, the nice museum to feel like we were a part of. And then we'd do stuff in Boston, take the 2-hour trip home. So I always felt connected to that school of the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And I chose to go to Tufts mainly because I knew they had a combined degree program where you could study liberal arts at Tufts and then transfer and do studio art at the museum school. So that's what I did. And it was heaven. It was just a thrill to be there. And I put in, I guess, 2.5 years as a student there. And then I was connected with a group of friends who had studied with the same teacher that I mostly studied with there. His name was Kaji Aso, a Japanese man. He was a wonderful painter. And with him, they had already, a couple years before I graduated, they had graduated and started a small school in a triple-decker brownstone in the Fenway area of Boston near the museum school. And they wanted a place where artists could come, especially if they had just left art school and they were looking for a way to set up their own studio and have support for doing the work and have support for showing their work, not just be thrown out into the snooty gallery system of a big city. So that's what they had there. And it was, again, heaven. You could take classes. I ended up teaching painting and drawing there to some extent. We had a group dinner every Thursday. People would just come and eat together, and people took turns cooking, though I did it actually cooked there for a year straight. And it was just a wonderful gathering, and there would be a discussion group afterwards. And there were poetry classes, and eventually there was a piano in the gallery downstairs. So we had our own gallery as well as classroom spaces. So we had shows, and I was learning about mounting shows and publicity and being an artist. I kind of jumped all over the place. Did you have more specific questions you should ask before I get to all this?
No, I think you're doing great, Jane. I want to keep hearing you.
It's a long story. I mean, I'm 67 now. I'm trying to keep it succinct. There's a lot of years to this story at this point.
Absolutely.
But that was the fun part of the story. And I lived in different apartments and houses with roommates and housemates and boyfriends, and got to travel some. And of course had to work another job the whole time besides being at the studio as much as I could. Teaching painting there wasn't really a paid gig. I think the deal was you didn't have to pay for your kind of co-op fees, helping to keep the building. The building was rented at that point. So there were expenses. People did pay to take classes there. But anyway, I had to make other money and did some work as a nurse's aide in a lot of different situations. And then a friend of mine got a job as a switchboard operator at Mass General Hospital. She said, this is a blast. You have to come do this. It's the coolest job. And it really was. I got over there, and this is my introduction to the kind of job that I would look for from then on. Very flexible hours, different hours. There were, I think it was basically like hospital work hours, like 7 to 3, 3 to 11, 11 to 7, something like that. And I was always drawn to the evening hours. I'm a night owl to start with. And I always liked working where administration had closed down and the regular bosses had gone home. And then you just kind of have the place to yourselves or to yourself to just do your job, but not feel that pressure of, you know,
Yeah.
of having a job. And it was just a cool, I just really loved that job. And weekends were cool too. I didn't mind working weekends. I didn't have kids in school. I didn't have, have to keep to that kind of a schedule where I needed to be home certain times. And it paid more. There was a differential in the pay for evening and night and weekend hours. That seemed strange to me because it was so much better to work those hours anyway. But the people who worked there a lot of them had been friends for decades. There were women who worked there since, they got out of high school and they were retirement age, and they had all helped raise each other's kids and were godparents, godmothers to their friends' kids who worked there. And it was very family-ish there. And then there were the people like me, younger people in grad school, people who were, working while doing other things in their lives. And the older women just took everybody under their wing, and it was a very family-ish feel, even though it was, on the top floor of a skyscraper in the middle of Boston at a gigantic, world-renowned hospital facility. It felt like just working in your best friend's living room. So that was a lot of fun. And things were going well at the studio. After several years of being there, I guess I started going there. Well, I graduated when I was 22, 23, did an extra semester. And I just started working at the studio right away. And we had a lot of shows. We did a lot of painting shows around Boston, some big venues like the Prudential Center and Boston City Hall, as well as in our own gallery. We had a show up in a nice gallery in Vermont, and we were in a big art museum in Dayton, Ohio. Actually sold a painting at that one. That was a thrill. Sold a couple small things around home, but that was a nice event. And then a couple of the more skilled and ambitious artists there somehow got us a show in London, England, like across the ocean in Europe. And that was kind of an amazing feat. And they weren't, we didn't have like a lineup of who was going to be in the show yet or what the theme of the show was. It was scheduled for a year ahead. So we had a year to get ready, to raise money, to do publicity. And it was going to be in July, I think it was. Anyway, it turned out to be the same. Our opening day at this gallery was the same day as the wedding of Prince Charles and Diana in 1981. So there went our publicity. Let's just say we weren't the biggest story in London that weekend. Um, but we were there. We were there for the wedding. That was very exciting. But what happened during that year? Oh, and I should say my physical body at that time, um, as like around the time I was 22, I had a roommate who had started running, and it was really just around then that running became really a thing. Like jogging was something that just regular people did, not just running fanatics or particular kinds of athletes. It just was like everybody was going to buy a pair of running shoes and start running every day for exercise. So she got me to start running. And that wasn't something I like doing a lot of things. I love skiing. I would swim anywhere there was a body of water and people were swimming. I would swim. I love that. Ponds, lakes, rivers, the ocean, pools, always in water if I could be. Um, and I walked all over the city of Boston to get everywhere. It was just so beautiful. It was beautiful in every season. And like when I left the hospital, well, when I worked nights and I left the hospital, my friends there and I would go out dancing. We'd go to a club. It was the disco years. And that was something that was always huge in my life, just physically able to do all the time and love, just dance, just put on music and dance for fun in my house by myself or with my roommates, or put on music and dance while I did housework, or went to a club and danced, or went to a dance school and took classes, um, just all the time with friends. Tried ballet at the age of like 25. Obviously not to start a ballet career, but just to see what they go through a little bit, like just to get a taste of what that training would be like. Took a lot of classes in jazz dance and Afro dance, Afro-Cuban, Afro-Latin, Afro-Caribbean dance. Did a lot of dancing. So anytime somebody was going out to a club, go out and dance. And biking all over the city, just commuted huge distances on my bike to get to the hospital for work. And then from there to the studio, which was on a different, just like huge distances to opposite parts of Boston all the time. So that was going on. I was very active. I got very thin and strong. Was feeling pretty cute around then. And the year that we were getting ready for the show in London, I was basically engaged at that point, was living with my boyfriend, but we had started having a lot of trouble. And it just was very tense. It was very hard to come home late at night after my full day of working and then being at the studio and painting and helping out with planning, fundraising, yard sales, and different things to get us all to be able to afford to go there. The show was for a month, and we had a house, somebody's house, that we were renting for a month. There were expenses, needless to say. And the gallery, by the way, was not a hole in the wall. It was a beautiful gallery that was on the Mall, which is the wide boulevard that leads from Buckingham Palace to Trafalgar Square. Just, I don't know how they did that. I don't know how they got that show, but there we were. So to keep myself on track with my stories. So that year I decided that I was going to go. So I was painting to um, get some things ready to bring with me to have in the show. And things are getting tense at home. And I was working my other job. So I basically didn't get any sleep for about 10 months. And I knew that I was getting run down. And I just never dreamed that you could ever get sick and not recover. My mindset was of an able bodied person. I had had mono in college, and that was about the worst thing. But even that it felt terrible because it was a few weeks really I was completely out of commission. And it just seemed like forever. And then another couple weeks to really get back on my feet. And once it was gone, it was gone. And when I was a kid, I did get sick frequently in the winter, some bad flus and bronchitis, and I had pneumonia once. But once they were gone, they were completely gone. And I was completely healthy again. So I just kept thinking, soon I'll take better care of myself. Soon there'll be some time to sleep. I just have to be sure I get this done. I have to get that done. Now I'm dealing with, having a fight with somebody at home. And somehow the months just went by. And by the spring, we were set to go in July. And by the spring, I felt like I had mono again. And I was really having trouble. I really had trouble. I couldn't really bike to work anymore. That was quite a few miles and through quite a few different areas of Boston. It was a very challenging bike ride. It wasn't just like from my house to the office, like in a little town somewhere. It was pretty ridiculous. And the times I would do it, I would get to work and just be shaking and in a cold sweat and just be sitting in the break room. And anytime I sat down, I would fall into a deep, deep sleep. I managed to stay awake when I was out actually answering the phones or being a page operator or patient information. Those were the three big tasks at the hospital. But anytime I took a break, if I sat down in a comfy chair, I was in a deep, deep sleep. And sometimes when I did wake up, I'd realize they had just let me sleep. Like they never, kicked me in the shins and said, "Wake up, your break's over, by the way. I want to take my break." They just realized something was terribly wrong. And I would borrow my boyfriend's car as often as I could to drive in instead of trying to get there on the subway, or things just became really difficult, just difficult. So by the time I was getting on a plane to London, I should have been going to the hospital.
Oh, yeah.
And no one around me had any sense to help me with that. And I had zero sense myself. I just had no sense of how to take care of myself during that time, how not to burn out doing this. And I just had this feeling, well, I've got plane tickets to London. They're counting on me we were supposed to kind of take turns being at the gallery with our show, to not just let the gallery owner promote it, but to actually talk about our studio and our gallery and our philosophy about painting. We tended to be people who really wanted to be working from nature more than anything. kind of promoting the beginner artist, just connecting with that. The gallery actually was called Gallery Nature and Temptation, because the painting teacher just had this sense of, oh, when you see a nice clear lake, you just want to jump right into it on a hot day, when you see a beautiful flower, you just have to sniff it. And some people really just crave drawing it, or trying to draw it, or trying to use paint to capture that light in the air right now, or that sunset or something. And we really felt like I have respect for all kinds of artists and types of work that people do, but I really felt that the art that was considered traditional wasn't old fashioned or out of date. It was something that is new for every single person who wants to attempt it, who really craves it and wants to learn a little bit more about using materials and getting some help from a teacher, but they'll just get better with time at what they're doing, but they just enjoy the process because it's fun. It's kind of magic to use paint and color and pencils and charcoal. So that's what we did, and we loved talking about it. And we were supposed to be there at the gallery. And I just felt like I'm in for a penny, in for a pound. I've worked so hard to get ready for this. I'm going. I'm not going to let them down. And I'll get better when I get back. So off I went on a plane. By the time I got to London, my vision was starting to feel very far away, kind of. And even my hearing, I felt like it was getting harder to, like the sound, like sounds were getting farther away. I felt like, especially looking back on it, I feel like I was in some kind of a walking coma, that just my willpower kept me going. And I know for the first time ever, I felt like to take a step or to move any part of my body was a mental exercise.
Wow.
That it wasn't just, oh, I need to go grab that off the counter and I do it without thinking about it. It was like, now I have to stand up and go from here to the counter. Like I have to make that happen. And now I look back, I think I probably was terribly dehydrated. I probably needed IVs. I don't know if there's anything they could have done for me, but I needed some medical attention. But the whole thing is just seems so stupid in retrospect to me. It's just so frightening and negligent on just the part of the people around me and my parents who saw me and my father who was a doctor. But of course, they just assumed that I had the sense if I was that sick, I would fall over. I would call an ambulance. I mean, I was 20, almost 27 years old. I wasn't 4 years old, but I didn't have a huge sense of self-preservation. So on I went. And the day I got there, that night was the night before the wedding, the royal wedding. So our house was in Hampstead Heath, which was a big bus ride or subway ride, tube ride out of the city a little bit. But we came back in for this event, which was a massive, millions and billions of people were in London to celebrate the wedding. And it was at one of the parks, Hyde Park or St. James Park, something. I forget, but it was a big, big park, and they were going to have fireworks and music at one end. And then from the stage, just for miles, there were people packed in so tight. It was freaky. I mean, you couldn't, the streets, not just the big streets, but every little street, for as far as you could imagine, was packed. Like you couldn't get away from being jammed with people. So we got there before it was completely just like that. And we watched the fireworks and everything. And I'm like, well, now I'm in London. As long as my mind can force my body to move around, I want to see stuff and do stuff. Like, you know, and go do my hours at the gallery. But when I'm free, I want to do other things. So I wasn't missing this event. So there I was. And then we see the fireworks in the shape of Prince Charles and Diana's heads and everything. Just, it was so over the top. And all these Brits just losing their minds over the whole thing. And we decided we had to leave, I guess, pretty much when it was over. You couldn't get to one of the gates, like the open exits of this park, because it was fenced in a lot. You just had to slowly get bumped over to a fence, and then people were just getting like mosh pitted out of the park, just getting picked up and dumped on the other side. So that happened, got picked up and dumped on the other side of the fence, and then just kind of gradually, inch by inch, shove our way down the street towards Hampstead Heath. And you couldn't get a taxi. The subways were jammed. We just there weren't any buses on the streets. There wasn't room for anybody. Anyway, we eventually got back walking miles to our house. And the next day, we didn't try to go back to that area to see if we could see them in the carriage and everything. That would have been a cool part too. I love the Royals. I mean, it was very exciting. And I was dying to see more of the palace and their carriage. It has been fun, but it was not possible to just shove our way back in and back out again. So we watched it on TV like everybody else. And I was just sick as a dog in this weird condition of weakness, cold sweat, and tunnel vision and tunnel hearing. It was so bizarre. So that went on for weeks. I went into town to be at the gallery. I would leave the gallery. I got into a routine where there was a little basement coffee house that had music, like live music. And I would go there and get a bite to eat after the gallery and have coffee and just kind of crash for a while and then listen to music. There was a Peruvian folk group that played beautiful Peruvian native music for many nights. And I did a lot of sketching there, and I sketched the owner of the club, who was a Moroccan man. And he liked the sketch, took it for his ads, and I got everything free from then on. So I have two memories of that trip, two sets of memories. One is torture, bizarre, scary, physical weirdness and torture, this state that I was in. And the other was I just separated in my mind. And then I saw this and I did that and ate wonderful Indian food and Greek food and fish and chips. and had a show in London, and then came back from London. Please stop me at any point, Sherry. Are you still there?
I'm here. I'm here, and I'm taking little notes along the way. And you're doing great, Jane. And now I want to hear what happened when you got back.
Yeah. So first, I have to say, we all had a chunk of the works that were shown. Glass framed watercolors, oil paintings. Somebody might have had some sculpture, I don't know, drawings, but framed work that we kind of divvied up to take home with us on the flight. So I have not only my bags, but these huge, heavy boxes of framed artwork that I'm trying to get through customs, or I don't know, do you go through customs on the way out? I guess you do.
Yeah.
And then on the way in Boston. So that whole trip was a nightmare. I couldn't do anything myself, and it was hard getting people to help. And okay, so I eventually get myself schlepped back to Boston. Friend from the studio picked me up, took me back to my house. My boyfriend was. And I really don't remember the next 2 weeks, except that I know I woke up enough to use the bathroom. It was weird because I really feel like the depth of sleep is hard to describe. Hard to describe. The depth of my need to be unconscious and the weakness of my body, just the muscle weakness. And my temperature was really low, like way sub normal. And I these cold sweats, like I never had a fever, but I just felt like I was dying. Again, somebody somewhere could have encouraged me to see a doctor at that point, go to the emergency room. I don't know why. We all thought, well, she'll get over it. And I thought, oh, I'll get over it. It's bizarre. But I do think that I got up. I must have eaten a little bit. And I know I used the bathroom. But I would go right back to bed and just be in this weird semi-comatose state for all day and all night for 2 weeks, going on 3 weeks. Oh, and at the same time, my boyfriend he had basically a conference to go to, but it was his model rocket club. He was an MIT graduate and stayed with these friends of his who built model rockets, and they built all kinds of things that could fly, and they would get together and have gatherings, I don't know, meetings, conferences, and fly their rockets. So he had a rocket that got stuck in a tree while I was gone. And he climbed the tree and fell out of it and broke his arm really badly. So he came back in a cast and was in, a lot of pain, and he was disabled at the time for a while. So the two of us were in really bad shape. And I remember we couldn't shop for food. We couldn't make food really. And he was very fatigued from this incident just happening too. It was a bad break. It was up near the shoulder, and it was going to take him some time to get really back on his feet from that. So he couldn't take care of me. I couldn't take care of him. And I just remember this realization that we had a very dysfunctional life because we didn't really have a home life. We were just busy, 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 busy all the time. And we had a million friends that we did tons of things with all the time. But they weren't people to take care of us. Like it wasn't like a family. It was like, well, if you can't keep up, call us when you're ready to jump back into the rat race with us. So at one point, I remember we just put the word out, and I was trying to communicate to my friends at the studio who had just come back from London that how sick I was, because they were like, why we just got back, like we want to keep up the momentum having just had this show, and I was feeling that. I was very inspired from being there and just was dying to come back and paint. And, I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't paint on my own at my house. I didn't have the strength for that. And people were getting annoyed with me because whatever I was supposed to be doing, teaching a class or being there for them. I'm like, I got to go back to bed. Bye. And it started dawning on me that we were nuts. Like, I don't know if everybody who lived in the city was like that. I doubt it. But it was very, when we asked for some help with shopping and food, because we're your friends, and the two of us have had this disaster happen and can't do these things. And we begged someone to pick up some groceries and cook some food that we could have for like a week. Because of course we kept thinking too, and he was recovering after a little bit, but I kept thinking, well, this has to be over soon. I was awake more and more of the time, but I couldn't do anything. And this one friend said she would help, she'd help. Okay, and that's what we expected, was groceries for a while and some prepared food, kind of casseroles, like, like normal people do for each other. And she came with, first of all, she walked in and both of us were lying on couches in the living room, and we looked freaking pitiful, evidently, because she walked in and just burst out laughing, like, oh my God, you guys, you look pathetic. Like, you're just lying there like, thanks. They just went down. I mean, this was a very good friend of ours from the studio. And here's your food. Well, she was a very good cook. And she unveiled this dish with like a few pieces, I think, of like roasted eggplant with a couple of little strips of pepper on top and a garnish or something. It was very pretty, and it was like hardly any food. And
Oh my God.
like, it was so bizarre. We ate it, but I, I keep saying life. I'm so, I don't know, I'm still nervous about being recorded. Can we just say too, we're doing this in the time of the great pandemic of COVID. And my level of anxiety in general is so magnified, just so as like high as it could be all the time, that any simple thing just seems like it's going to be a huge hurdle to get over. So I'm nervous about everything. I'm nervous about doing this too. My disclaimer. So I'm sorry if I say like too much and I'm annoying to listen to.
You're doing a great job, Jane. Thank you.
Oh my God.
So you didn't get any help, it sounds like.
We got no help. And I called my parents in this, oh, not to throw them under the bus. My parents did a lot of wonderful, wonderful things in my life. But I called them in a panic saying, I need some help. Like, I really need some help. Can you guys come in and bring some groceries? And they said, well, we'll come in and take you out to eat. Of course, that was a thing in my family. That was a big thing. That was our big luxury that we were able to do. We just loved to go out to eat. Like, you don't understand. I am not okay. I can't move. I can't leave the house. Well, we'll come in when you're feeling better and you can go out to eat. It's like, what is wrong with you? These moments stand out when I suddenly saw a lot of dysfunction very clearly. That when I was healthy and well and able-bodied and young and strong, didn't know we're going to be a problem when I collapsed at the age of 27. And, I've fallen and I can't get up again. That happened to me at 27. And it's been for the last 40 years. So that was going on for weeks. I did start seeing a doctor at Mass General. We actually had great healthcare coverage there. Those were the days when pretty much any job would give you health insurance. So I had Blue Cross Blue Shield, plus there was a employee clinic that you could just waltz into for free. And they could check you out and refer you to any doctor at Mass General and go from there. So I saw a primary care doctor and then infectious disease. They couldn't find anything except that I had the markers for the Epstein-Barr markers for mono, which I had had since the episode in college. So the assumption was that I, for some reason, was able to get mononucleosis again. But I had to start getting back to work. I had to start increasing my activity. And then eventually I'd be back to normal. So of course I wanted to believe that. Plus I had to make a living. And I kept trying to go to work. Well, there was no question that I couldn't ride my bike down the Emerald Necklace Parks, through the Fenway, across the bridge over the Mass Pike to Storrow Drive, and then all the way down the park that was the Esplanade Park that went all the way along the Charles River to Charles Circle and up over the bridge and down to Mass General. There are a lot of parts of that trip I left out. But clearly, I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't have my own car. My boyfriend let me take the car a lot of times. But it was difficult sharing that. Sometimes I just thought, well, I should be able to take the subway. There were a lot of, I only had to walk a couple of blocks down our nice quiet street. wait for a bus to get to the subway station, take that line all the way in, change lines. It was a big subway trip, but normally I could have done it. And if I felt well enough, I was starting to be where I could get up, maybe take a shower, get dressed, have something to eat, brush my teeth, be ready to leave for work, and feel a little bit normal up to that point, and then completely collapse and have to lie down flat, couldn't be sitting, couldn't stand, had to lie down flat and wait for some strength to come back. And it might not come back again the rest of that day. So I was a nervous wreck calling in sick to work all the time. I mean, again, the, the concept of, well, now you're disabled just wasn't an option, wasn't a possibility in my mind. Somehow disabled people were born that way. They were in, they had things that looked different. And it was obvious who they were, and they were in wheelchairs, and they needed certain things, and I wasn't one of those people. So to be someone who just had to call in sick day after day after day to my job was unnerving. And then it got to where I thought I could leave the house. So let's try going for the bus. And I just remember walking down our nice quiet street and barely a block down, just, seeing the street ahead of me that I needed to get to catch the bus. And just being so weak and my knees just shaking so much and my legs shaking so much. And I had to lie down on the sidewalk to be able to eventually get up and walk home and call in sick to work. Back to my doctor and say, this is what happens. I'm trying to work. I'm trying to add, small walks into my day, but here are the days where I can't even take a shower. I'm up, I'm trying, and I have to lie down, and the day is over for me. So it was terrifying, and they just had nothing they could tell me. They just had no tests. Any tests they did looked normal except for the mono. Okay. So that's 1981. I have to leave the house I'm in. He and I can't live together anymore. Me being sick all the time was the last straw for him. This was not what he signed up for. No longer Bashert, our parents had all met each other. It was nice that he was Jewish. My background was Jewish and Protestant, but I had really, once I was in college, I really made a lot of Jewish friends, learned a lot more about being Jewish, and did a lot of Jewish activities and observed holidays. So it was nice. We had a lot of friends in common, but we couldn't be together. We were no longer engaged. This was not going to happen. And that I just had to get away from. So I was hardly working, couldn't afford to live on my own, had no energy to deal with this. Went back to my parents' house. And I had a car at that point. I think maybe they donated an old car and got a new one, something like that. Or I don't remember. But anyway, I was able to drive one of their cars in and out of Boston from this town that was 25 miles away. And I was still I was much more functional, but that wasn't saying much. I still was not. anywhere near normal for me. But I struggled to go to work, made a bit of a paycheck. I couldn't go to the studio at all, pretty much ever after that, except for the occasional event. But I couldn't paint. I couldn't paint at home. I only had enough strength and energy to shower, dress, and see if I could work my job or not. And I did have a terrible depression kick in at that point because things had been very, very fun for a few years until this happened. I mean, I was madly in love. It was, there were, just the year before, it was like all possibilities in the world ahead of me. I was painting, I was showing my work in, a different country. It seemed like things would be great from there. And instead, I'm back at my parents' house and I can hardly move. And I'm out of a relationship and no one can help me. And I started seeing the doctor at Mass General more often, just saying, look, I know what you've told me already. What can you tell me now? I mean, this is not a plan. This isn't going anywhere. And I need more help. And he couldn't deliver. He did at some point send me to infectious disease. And she tested everything and didn't have an answer for me. Saw her several times. I was lucky that I had been involved in this RC, the reevaluation counseling, for many years already in my 20s. And I know you know about it, but it's a peer counseling support network that's international, and there was a big community of people in the Boston area who were involved with it. And the person I was closest to, we would share time back and forth. I would take time as her counselor, she would be the client, and then we'd switch. And I was lucky in that she was also in her life a licensed social worker, family therapist. So she had a lot of knowledge as well as just the kindness to listen to me cry over everything. But she had a lot of information, and she had dealt with a lot of chronic illness issues herself. So she had already learned a lot about functioning and getting help and making the adjustments needed to live with something that was apparently not going away anytime soon, rather than just trying to get back to being exactly the way I was and being tearing my hair out with my hair on fire every single day that wasn't happening. So I learned so much from her. And we talked many times a week. And it was a place for me to start grieving as the year went on. That I was not, I had to think in terms of living with this instead of expecting it to go back to the way it was without losing hope for the future. But that was my main task right then was, okay, how do I actually deal with this and accept that this is happening? Another thing that was helpful, I feel like, I I was trying to get back to living in the city somewhere on my own and out of my parents' house, and did find that a friend of good friends of mine from the studio, um, had bought a triple decker in Cambridgeport, which is part of Cambridge that's near the river and near Central Square, and kind of tucked in this residential area that was really near Harvard Square too. And if I had been healthy and had found this apartment, it would have been the home of my dreams. Of every artist I know would have found this the home of their dreams. It was super cheap to start with, although I needed a roommate most of the time to be able to swing it. Because of course, utility costs in Boston for much of the year are really high, super high. Even then, we're still talking like 1982. But this guy had bought this triple decker. He lived on the middle floor. There was an older person who had been there forever who was on the first floor, and the top floor was empty. And it was huge, for one thing. It had been built maybe around the 1890s or turn of the century. It was very, very funky. It needed a ton of work. It was dilapidated. But his plan was to gradually put money into it. He had already replaced all the ancient windows with, good, whatever the state of the art windows were in the 80s, like double pane, solid, more insulating windows. That was maybe the only thing I can think of that he had really upgraded yet. So on the top floor, well, the good things first. Is this okay if I talk about this apartment? Kind of.
Go for it.
What?
Go for it.
Okay. I don't know. There are some things I love talking about besides the illness. And this was such a glorious find. And he was a really decent guy, good politics and everything. And he was never going to, he was always going to try to make it as affordable as possible. And said, really, it's your place for life. There is, unless you do something insane that I can't imagine, I will never kick you out. So if you want to rent for the rest of your life, which is a reasonable thing to do as an artist if you don't really want a lot of the other expenses and responsibilities. And I was like, so the perfect location, our studio was on the Fenway, which is down, people who know the Boston area, Mass Ave goes from way down in Boston, South Boston, through the Fenway area, past Symphony Hall, past some more stuff, Newbury Street, all these streets connect to it, and then it goes over the river past MIT, through Central Square, all the way to Harvard Square, and then out from there to North Cambridge. Okay, so there's a bus route that whole way. I was just a few blocks from Central Square. I could have, if I were healthy. Sorry, it's so loud out here right now. I don't know if you can hear that. Things are roaring by my apartment. But I could walk a few blocks and hop a bus to get to the studio, like that. Or go the other way and be in Harvard Square, like that. And that was my world then, basically. I mean, to be able to move around like that and be so close and such a cheap way to get around. That was would have been very cool for me had I been able to do it. And I mean, the way I had been before, I could have biked and walked all those distances and been all around Cambridge, all into Boston. everywhere I wanted to be, I could have been. Okay, great location. Or down to the river, a few blocks the other way. Love the river, beautiful river. So I'm thinking I have some kind of leftover weird mono. It's been a horrible year, but there's no way it's going to last much longer. Who ever heard of mono lasting your whole life? Nobody, ever. Doesn't happen. I need to snap up this apartment and somehow make this work. So I take my little self and my little salary and make my poor 70-year-old husband. That's weird. Father, think of my mother, my father, helping me move all my stuff back from their house to a real apartment. And now I'm in this place that has an enormous eat-in kitchen, like old places have, with a pantry. Off the kitchen was one big room. Oh, huge windows. Like the windows were beautiful. These tall, beautiful, big things on all four sides of this apartment. So the light was incredible, gorgeous. So kitchen, once it was fixed up, could have been really charming. Big bedroom with two sides of windows off the kitchen. That was my room. Another room off the kitchen had been obviously the dining room, and it had these built-in like china cabinet things, like the shelves with the glass doors, and underneath it were drawers, like like bureau drawers. And this dark paneling. What do you call it? Like from here down, and then painted walls from there up. But that was like a roommate's bedroom. Okay. One bathroom with the original clawfoot tub.
Oh, nice.
No shower, but cool tub. Great big huge window. Curtains on the bottom part of it, and I just sat in that tub like on hot days in the summer with the windows open and the breeze blowing and the curtains blowing, read the Sunday paper in the tub. And in the winter, when I'd be frozen solid when I got home from waiting for a bus or something, it was really hard to heat that place. It was really drafty, not the windows, but basically it just had a little tar paper roof. Like he hadn't replaced the roof yet. And it just leaked and the heat just flew out of it. I mean, flew out of it. You could spend $1,000 a month on heat and you would not keep that place warm. That was a problem, considering I was now chronically ill. So I constantly had, this had been going on the whole time. I had horrendous sore throat and swollen glands since before London. So when I was working as a switchboard operator again, it was excruciatingly painful, and my throat would just like be scratched open and bleeding in the back from talking so much. I was in so much pain all the time. And I switched jobs right before I moved into this place. I got a job supervising a switchboard at a small college, Lesley College, Boston, in Cambridge, right by where I was, and right by where this apartment would be, just on the other side of Harvard Square. So again, it was kind of looking like, this is all going to work out. But I still had a terrible sore throat the whole time. But being a supervisor of a switchboard, there's a lot, it's easier. As management, it's always easier than just doing the work every second that you're at the job. So I managed to keep that job for 5 whole years. But it was a big struggle. I had to keep changing my hours. I was coming in later and later and working fewer hours. And I had someone I job shared with eventually. But it was difficult. Okay. Anyway, I'm still feeling optimistic and hopeful about the future. And I have this apartment. When I first moved in, the bathroom had toilet was also probably from like 1910. I swear this family had been there forever. Are you getting tired?
No, I'm good. I'm good, Jane.
Let me know.
No, go for it.
Okay. So it didn't flush. It had the water tank on the wall with a chain and the like wooden pull on the chain. That's how you flushed, and the water would come down and flush. And it was like Downton Abbey or something, like the maid's quarters bathroom, you know. But I loved it so much. Also, I had friends coming to help me with like all the ceilings were just crumbling down, flaking, probably full of lead paint from 1912. Just all falling down. That needed doing. The walls were all peeling wallpaper and peeling paint. That needed doing. Floors needed work. But ceilings so I had friends come and help me, and I was still trying to get on a ladder and do a little scraping and a little painting myself. We got some things done, but tons of things still needed doing. But the bathroom was hilarious. It was so cool. It had this real old-fashioned wallpaper that was, needed to come down because it was so crumbly. But we did the thing. My mother had taught me how to do this a long time ago. We used to scrape off old wallpaper all the time in our houses and put new wallpaper up. So with like the hot water and vinegar and the scraper thingies, whatever that tool is called, soak it all down, start scraping. And we only got so far. Well, for one thing, there was like layer after layer. And it was like black swans on pink ponds with, purple water lilies and some green leaves. And there'd be white swans on, blue little ponds with some pink flowers around them. Just like water lilies and swans, just like one after the other, layers of wallpaper. And then finally, all of a sudden, the wall just caved in to like empty space. Because it was the layers of wallpaper that were holding it up. And the rest, like the plaster stuff or whatever was supposed to be behind it, was long gone. So, so he came up and put up some wallboard and painted it white. But it was fun to see all those cool things. So then further down the hall towards the front entrance, this long, straight, narrow hallway. And then, so at the other end were these two big, like a parlor and a living room. This homes in New England built around that time had parlors, as well as more of a den kind of living room. It was like the fancy formal parlor. So the gorgeous windows, 3 big windows in the front of that, looking out to the front yard and the street, and a fireplace with this cool kind of like emerald green enameled tile, sort of, I don't know, not metallic, but just had this kind of cool luster to it. Beautiful. He didn't want us using it. He hadn't really updated the flue or anything, and would have been a bad idea. But it was beautiful. It had a little hearth and a beautiful mantle over it, and a couple of kind of sconces on the wall, sort of wrought iron things. which at one point, after I lived there for a while, I smelled gas in the living room.
Oy.
So I called him up and he goes, well, the only thing in here that could be putting out gas would be those. He goes, the wall sconces next to the fireplace. He goes, they could not possibly still be hooked up to the gas. So he went and turned the little screw on one of them, and like gas shot out. Like you could have lit them and probably blown up the whole house, but it had never been turned off to these. That was a fun discovery also. But in between these two big rooms, there were pocket doors. You know how valuable pocket doors are now in like new construction? Just old-fashioned detail. And of course, moldings, all kinds of moldings and baseboards and woodwork. It was just a cool, cool place. So I could have an actual, I had never lived anywhere where, like, if I set up a little place to paint, it was at home, it was in my bedroom. Like, I went to the studio, but I wanted to be working from home too. Or in the living space. But, then, like, you were breathing turpentine 24 hours a day at that point. But in this place, I had a room that could actually be a living room. Could have actual, like, furniture someday that people could sit on with the stereo going. I hadn't ever really had a TV as a grown-up yet, but sorry. But there could be a TV in there. It could be a real living room, living space. And this beautiful big room next to it that had crumbling painted walls, which was a plus in this case, that could be my studio. And I could even close the doors in between them, these pocket doors. I can't explain to you how much this, I love describing this because it is a dream. And it was in the treetops. So you get beautiful, like, bare branches in the winter and fall color everywhere you looked outside in the fall, and just beautiful spring and summer breezes and leafy green trees everywhere you looked. It was a dreamy place, and I think it was something like $300 a month then. And, with a roommate, I mean, it's a long time ago, but even with my crap part-time salary at that point, I could afford to live there. So that's where I was, and doing my counseling with my good friend who was really helping me go step by step now with trying to figure out what I could do in a given day, try to learn how to judge so I didn't end up just stranded, on the other side of the city with, unable to get home or something, but try to learn all those things that people with chronic illness learn. And at the end of the day, kind of go over what happened during that day and where I made good decisions and where I made bad decisions to take care of myself, and how I felt at the end of the day and what I had done maybe that had caused that, and how to do that better next time, where to get help. Maybe I shouldn't have tried to do all that by myself, whatever it was. So she was, what a blessing that was. Okay, then the next really helpful thing that happened was, and I didn't, at my new job, I didn't have all the Mass General doctors. I had different insurance, and I went to an HMO clinic, and they were getting sick of me. I was trying to get them up to speed with what had all happened, and that I wasn't recovering. So what next, folks? And I heard all kinds of strange things. That's when I really started to to experience all the wonders of the medical system, all the bad doctors, doctors with bad attitudes, doctors who have anger issues, doctors with bad personalities, doctors who, being humiliated, and just a lot of discouraging experiences started to pile up. I had one doctor who was, I put on some weight, needless to say, and I had one doctor who was lying on the exam table, and he was listening to various things and pressing my abdomen, and he goes, this was actually kind of funny, but it stands out as one doctor experience. He goes, you got the same problem I do. I'm like, what? He goes, blubberitis. I have a fat stomach now. You don't have to. Kind of funny. But then I had a doctor, and I wasn't aware at that point. I didn't know about the legalities of medical records, like the rules and regulations about that. So I had a new doctor, and she left the room for a while and had my records, my file, which of course it was on paper then, just on the counter, like next to me. So I just took it to look at it out of curiosity, never had seen my records there. And she came in and saw me and freaked out. I wasn't supposed to be able to see those. I said, what do you mean? Of course I can. They're my records. She goes, well, yes, but you have to go through a process of asking to see them. And I don't know, it was a whole thing. So, okay, I guess because they can't have anyone try to change anything or something. I don't know. It was news to me. But what I saw while I glanced through these pages was the problem. She had asked about my history, my family history, and I had mentioned that my father was a doctor. So she wrote that she thought that because my father was a doctor, I had issues with just wanting someone to take care of me. Like,
Oh my God.
like I was going to the doctor all the time because I wanted attention, basically. And I hit the roof. I mean, and that was a theme that would come up a lot for a while. That, I mean, a lot of people with different chronic illnesses, until they get, unless it's one that doctors like, or just, has so much developed theory and understanding about. If you have something that's at all mysterious, it's a very common problem to be talked down to and dismissed as if you're seeking attention. And the reason people like me, but I've known a lot of other people who had to fight through this, the reason it's so infuriating is that I can list so many examples, I could at that time, of how I was fighting to get my life back so I could do more. And the reason I got so much sicker all the time is because I did way too much, because I want to be doing more. And I had never, if I'd gone to a doctor when it first started and got some attention and some good advice, maybe I wouldn't have developed this chronic issue. But that does kind of prove that I just didn't go to doctors. I didn't want to. I have better things to do, So that was happening then. But at that clinic, they finally said, all right, well, you have chronic pain, the chronic sore throat and everything, and weakness. We have a chronic pain support group. Maybe you could just go to that and at least be talking to people. Okay, I had never done anything like that yet. So I went And it was valuable. It was mostly I was just feeling like, wow, this is my first exposure to these kinds of strategies of, sharing information about how to deal with doctors, how to deal with pain, how to deal with, we did like some meditations and stuff to try to get on top of our pain levels. And I started learning some things. Okay. And somebody there, this was the best thing that ever happened to me. Um, okay, I don't remember what kind of person it was, but somebody there did suggest that I go to a group that was meeting at the Center for Independent Living in Boston, like completely separate from anything else. As we now know, wonderful organization. So they had I don't know, it was a slightly different type of group, but for chronic illness and disability support. So let me tell you about this. I go to my first meeting there, and this is when I, in an instant, learned, had my consciousness raised about disability, for one thing, besides my own issues. But this was like, I'll say one thing about me. I've had a lot of, I have my share of flaws for sure. And I have had my whole life. But when I see the truth, like when I get corrected about something, especially about like issues of oppression and liberation, racism or classism or that kind of, elitist attitude, because I came from a very kind of sheltered place. And there were a lot of old-fashioned notions that I heard growing up. And it took a while to dismantle them. Well, this was one of them because my family, everyone had been healthy and able-bodied. All my friends, healthy and able-bodied. So I go to this group, and different people are starting to collect in this circle of chairs. People are coming, and a couple people in wheelchairs, and other people you can't tell what's wrong with them. And then this one woman came in a motorized wheelchair, and it seemed like the only thing she could move was like her thumb to move the button on the chair and go. And everything was propped up, like she had a neck brace, keeping her head up. And she looked to me just extremely disabled. And I was even thinking like, wow, she might be a little too far on the very disabled side for this group. Everybody here is like talking and, moving around. And I was thinking like, can she even talk? Is this, ooh. So then she starts speaking and she motors up to the front of the circle. Not only is she okay, like 100% okay in every way, really. There's just nothing wrong with this woman. She's got a very disabled body, but there is nothing wrong with her in the world. She's leading the group. Not only is she the leader of the group, but she's the director of the Center for Independent Living. She's introducing herself, and just with every word she said, I could feel these blinders fall away from my eyes about disability and people with disabilities. Like, whoa, I really have ridiculous attitudes I didn't even know I had. And she just was a joy. She had a master's degree in art therapy. She, led these classes in art therapy and taught and directed the center, and we were lucky enough to have her as the leader of our group. So it was a great group. And I talked about, I remember saying that, at first, like about my issues, but the only time I can function at all is if I get a deep, deep, good sleep the night before. But I can never sleep like that. Like there's something about the illness, and it turns out there's something about the illness that um, keeps you from getting into the deep restorative levels of sleep. It's considered an autoimmune disease, and it keeps you kind of upregulated in some ways that are harmful to your sleep quality. So I didn't know all that then, but I knew that I couldn't sleep. So every day was torture. So one of the young men who was in a wheelchair started yelling at me. He's like, and talking to Connie was her name, who ran the group. He's talking to her like, why is she even in here? What is your problem exactly? You can't sleep? I have MS. I was a pro golfer. He was like 26 years old too or something, and had just started this fabulous golfing career. He was an athlete, had very like fast progressing MS, was already in a wheelchair. So it didn't bother me that he was yelling at me. Obviously, he had reason to be angry. But she stood up for me and just calmly explained to him, obviously, she has something that is very, very debilitating, and they have not figured out what it is yet. It's basically what she told the group as far as my condition. And she and I, hadn't spoken one-on-one yet at all or anything, but she just got it about what I was in a constant state of panic about. And obviously there was something terrible going on, and they just hadn't figured it out yet. So those two, his response and her response both, and just getting to know her was a big learning experience. So, and she was the one who said, who first told me about Social Security disability. Like, it had never occurred to me in all this time that I could be collecting any kind of payment from anything. I didn't have disability insurance and like private insurance. I didn't have any insurance really. And she's the one who said, well, if you're hardly working, you should be getting Social Security. If you can't work because you're sick, this was at the point when I was actually giving up on, I had been there for 5 years in that apartment and in that job. And by the time I was getting this help, I was really ready to just cash it in. It wasn't working, and I was getting much sicker. I'd been so sick all winter. That was the winter because I couldn't get the place warm enough, and I couldn't work enough to pay for everything. And my parents had retired and moved to Florida near one of my sisters. And I just started thinking in the spring, what if I just take a leave? Like I'll leave my job, but I'll just maybe get a subletter for a while, go to Florida. Maybe if I take 6 months and really do nothing and not have to worry about anything, that will be it. Like that will be I'll recover during that time. That was the plan. But I had already stopped working when I met this group and Connie. And she said, well, if you're not working because you're sick, you should be getting this money. So I applied. I started that process. And that was a huge, long deal. Obviously, everybody who's ever been through that knows You don't get accepted the first time. You might not get accepted the second time you apply when you appeal it. Maybe on the third time, you'll see a judge, have a hearing, and you'll get lucky. And that is what happened to me eventually. But it took a couple of years. But she started me on that process, and that was a lifesaver. I mean, I imagine I would have figured that out eventually, but it was news to me. I just thought, like, Social Security is for when you're old. Disability is for, like, veterans, old veterans. I was such a clueless babe in the woods. It's a wonder I lived as long as I did in the city without, I don't know. So where are we? We're almost to Florida. Okay, one more important thing happens then. A friend who had moved to San Francisco called me one night and said, I just saw 2020, and there's a doctor on 2020 who's been studying people who sound just like you. He's in Boston. You should call him. So I did. And it was Dr. Komarov. He's my hero, total hero. He was the head of internal medicine, I think. He's had some big jobs over there. And has now been retired for a little bit. But Anthony Komarov was in internal medicine and had started seeing people. This was at the Brigham and Women's Hospital. Did I say that? He started seeing people coming in who were completely wiped out beyond any description all the time. Sleep didn't help them. They were dysfunctional, and nobody had been able to figure out why. And the tests looked reasonably normal. And they were unable to work and at their wits' end. So I got an appointment with him. And this was another, like, really great turn. I'm losing my words. Getting brain fog, fatigue. Moment where things turn around. There's a word for that.
Turning point.
Thank you. That would be good. Because, okay, so this has been 5 years of desperation and struggle. I remember after 2 years, I remember just sitting down on the floor, realizing it had been a full 2 years, just like crying hysterically, just screaming, 2 years of my life. Like, I still wanted to go back to the studio. But yeah, so then it was 5 years, and I was about to move to Florida. Thank God I got this appointment with him. Go to Brigham and Women's. I sit down in his office. I tell him my story and how I feel physically and every step of the way. When I got done, he said, he's so handsome too. Oh my God, this guy was so dashing. He just was a gorgeous middle-aged man. He's a beautiful person. He said, well, we don't know what it is yet, but you definitely have it. Because I have just seen 200 people sit in the exact chair that you're sitting in, tell me the exact same story, word for word, and seen the exact same desperation in their eyes. It makes me want to cry just thinking about that. Because, some people would say, well, it's so vague what you've got. Like, everybody's got sore throats and, tired. Like, it's not vague at all. It's actually very specific. And just even the way, I think he mentioned, describing how tired my torso felt. Like, normally, do you ever think of your torso area? You don't. But just this feeling of like, I just have to lie completely flat because I can't hold this up. you know. So he understood. And though there wasn't anything he could do to help besides that encouragement, knowing that he was working on it, and some people were working on it, that's when I learned there was um, a community in around Lake Tahoe was one of the first communities that had an outbreak of it. And Boston had a community, and there were several other places. So he was on it. He had started research. He took my blood and did a whole questionnaire and I was in his study for, I don't know, over 20 years. Even after I came to Florida, I would ship him blood every year or two whenever he needed it. My blood is your blood, Tony. Love that guy. Filled out the questionnaire. So he kept tabs on how it all was progressing. And then I came to Florida for my little experiment, my 6-month experiment. Do we need to stop, or do we want to talk?
You want to take a break and come back?
I'm okay to keep going. I just wanted to check with you.
Okay, let's go. Let's keep going.
Okay, I'm just going to take a sip of my drink.
Yeah.
Okay. So, although I had been, I remember making the decision to move when it was in March of that year before I moved. It was a horrible March. I mean, I loved everything about winter normally, but it was a lot more challenging once I was sick. But that March was ice storms, just ice pouring out of the sky, like over and over and over. We had these horrendous storms, and the snow and the ice would just build up. My car, we had just on-street parking on these little narrow streets in Cambridgeport. So I couldn't shovel my car out, even if I was well enough to go somewhere. I was always asking my poor landlord neighbor to come help me do stuff. I mean, it was just too much for me. I didn't have that kind of family or community, or, I was basically living alone. So I had several different roommates over the years. But anyway, I just remember looking out the front hall window, the front yard, and the street, and I was parked there, and I could see, I mean, all the cars were just igloos. There was so much, you couldn't see the cars, just lumps. And the snow was so high. And it was just so cold and so windy. And it was so freezing in that hallway. And I was bundled up to my eyeballs. But I was up at 5 a.m, I remember, because I was supervising the switchboard. And anytime there was a huge storm, I had to be up on the phone with my boss, trying to figure out if the college is closed or not. Have they decided? Are we closing the switchboard? I know I can't get there. I don't know who's going to be able to get there. We'd have to call one of the student workers to just walk across campus and open the switchboard if she insisted on having it. So I'm waiting for callbacks. I have to stay awake. And my throat is bleeding. My glands are swollen out to here. It's like minus 30 degrees in this hallway. It was just like I don't want to leave forever, but I can't do this. And this is too much for me. So off to Florida I went. Not that Florida climate, by the way, sucks. I don't care. I'll never understand why people live here or why people move here. I'm not one of the people who moved here for the climate. it was because my parents were here. I mean, if they had lived in Maine, I still would have gone to live with them and dealt with the winter somehow. I mean, never would have occurred to me to really leave altogether. So I quickly found out that the heat in Florida for at least 10 months out of the year was as bad for me almost as the cold storms in the winter in Massachusetts. But here I was. So living with my parents, super depressed. Again, I'm back at my parents' house. Just not living my life at all. It was down in the undeveloped country kind of area on the Gulf of Mexico, which is very nice. Did see dolphins, very nice. Sunsets, beautiful. But I wasn't getting any better. I was fighting for Social Security. I was trying to establish getting seen by doctors. I went down to an infectious disease specialist in Tampa, I remember. And eventually, oh, here's somebody else who changed my life for the better. When I was denied Social Security twice, there was a guy working at the Social Security office who had helped me, and he called me with the news when I was denied again, kind of giving me a heads up. And then he said, I'm not supposed to do this, but let me ask you a question. Have you been depressed lately? And I was, screaming like I was screaming at everybody around then. Like, of course I'm depressed. I'm like living out here. I just came from the city that I love. And now I'm living out here with the mullets and the dolphins. Like, they're nice, but it's not my life. And I'm in my parents' house. It's not good. I have no money is the main thing. So he said, no, have you seen a psychiatrist for your depression? I said, no. All I need is to get this money coming in, and then I won't be depressed anymore. I can do something. He goes, no, what I mean is a lot of people who have chronic illnesses, their doctors vouch for them and everything, but Social Security doesn't consider it a bad disability. They just won't approve it. But if you have depression that a psychiatrist can vouch for and sign off on, Social Security tends to approve those very quickly. And I was thinking, this is another news flash to me. You mean all this time? I've been depressed for a long time now. That never occurred to me. I don't know. I don't know why I didn't seek help for that sooner anyway, but I certainly didn't think I could get disability payments coming in for that. But I said, fine, I'll go see a psychiatrist. So I stomped down to a psychiatrist my cousin knew in Clearwater, and he was really good. And he was someone else who made a big difference because we only, I basically said, look, can you sign these papers? I'll be fine once I get money coming in. I just have this other illness and they don't seem to think it's important. And he said, yeah, I probably can, but let's talk. So it might even have been my first session with him. And I was saying, it's not that I have real depression. I'm just really, he goes, trust me, I've been doing this a long time. You have real depression. Like, this is serious and there are things that can help. And I'm like, well, yeah, but I won't be as depressed if I just get, he goes, well, maybe not as depressed, but you're stuck in a very low place. And I'd been very anti-medications, anti-psychiatry, even though my father was a psychiatrist and I felt like he had done good things for people, but those were 70s and the 80s. We thought nothing good can come of that. We're not just going to get medicated when probably other things need to change in her. Well, I learned from him you can still be sad, you can still have problems, but there is medication that helps you get out of deep, destructive, paralyzing depression. And I started taking medication that did that. That also helped me sleep much better. And I started to see uh, some improvement, um, not with the overall fatigue, but just with feeling like I had enough strength to walk. Oh, I didn't tell you one of the last stupid things I did in Massachusetts was after going to a very tiring 4th of July event with the crowds on the Esplanade, with the Boston Pops playing and the fireworks, with my then boyfriend, I was madly in love with. Also hated leaving him, but found out he started seeing somebody while I was gone, so that was over. But we went to this big, long, hot night 4th of July event outside. Completely exhausted me. It was way too much walking for me, but we did that. And then he said, it was when they had just finished sprucing up the Statue of Liberty, putting her back on her pedestal, whatever. She was all shiny and new again. He said, wouldn't it be cool to see her on the 4th of July as the sun's coming up, hitting her shiny places? I said, that is the most ridiculous. I'm not going to New York right now. Like, no, that's stupid. I've learned a few things about pushing myself, and that would be really stupid. But it sounded so fun to just get in a car and do something. Just do something wild without thinking where my limitations were and what not to do. And maybe another time we could do that. But right now, we're home and sleep. And he promised he would drive the whole way. I could sleep in the back seat. Like that could happen, but I was so eager to just do something crazy. We did it. And that's whatever, 4-hour trip at midnight. That did not feel too good by the time we got there. We went down to the harbor. Nobody else was up yet. Sun was coming up. Real pretty. I thought I was going to die. Super hot day in New York City. We have to get something to eat. We're not prepared. We couldn't get a hotel room if our life depended on it. We had barely enough money to get some food and pay for gas. But we get a breakfast. It's like, well, we're here. We should, I'm too embarrassed to even say all the things we did and how far I walked in this humid, really high heat. It was a nightmare. Got home, 4 hours back, got home. It's so embarrassing to even describe how brain dead I was to do stuff like that. But we, showered, passed out cold. And when I woke up the next day, I slept really great, really deep sleep. I stood up to go to the bathroom, and the pain in my legs that just shot through my legs was so severe and unexpected. I just screamed bloody murder, and I had to sit back down in the bed. I'm like, what is this? I know what it is. It's my punishment. And it was, because I basically lost my legs at that point. I mean, you've seen how I have to manage my leg strength and what that's been like over the years, and my leg pain. I destroyed my legs. So by the time I was coming to Florida, I had this new element of my disability that was terrifying. And they only recovered to a certain extent, but that was a new addition that had to be factored into how I lived my life. Although I could still go upstairs, it was after, I mean, I couldn't go up and down, up and down, up and down, but I could go up and down once. But it was later on in Gainesville that I was overtired during a time I needed to look for a place to live. And I just remember I was going to check out some other apartments. And there was some glass at the edge of the road I lived on, going out to the main road. So I get out of the car and I crouched down to, sweep some of the glass away. There's a ton of broken glass. And I stood up from a crouch like you would just stand up. Like now, of course, I support myself with my hands, whatever I'm doing. But I just stood up and I felt this in the weak areas in my quads that I had had since New York. I just felt this sickening, ripping sensation going from my knees up my thighs, front of my legs, and was just shaking all over for hours. And that was the injury, the overuse injury that just made me much more disabled as far as the use of my legs. Since then, that's 30 years ago. So those are some of the milestones of good and bad that happened along the way. Where was that? So this psychiatrist he was awesome. He totally got, not only did I have history of depression in my family and severe depression from these life events that had been piling up, but he really could see and understand the nature of the disability I had acquired by then. And he had no problem at all. He's like, you cannot work. You need to take it easy. You need money coming in so you can survive. No problem whatsoever. And he just checked all the boxes of, she can't do this. She can't do that. She can't do shit. Give her the money. Like, I mean, to be in that position for so long, feeling so vulnerable and afraid, whenever somebody was like just standing up for me, you just can't describe how much that meant. So then I had a hearing with a judge. Oh, I found a legal aid lawyer. Here's another one, another hero of this saga. So it was very rural where I was living. It took, I don't know, hour and a half or so to get down to all these things I was trying to do in Tampa, medical and Social Security and everything. And what was I saying about it?
The legal aid lawyer.
Yes. So I looked some stuff up and found in Brooksville, which is inland a little bit from where they were, very rural, old Florida town, had a legal aid office. And since I had no income whatsoever, I figured I should give that a try. So I went and had an interview. I thought it'd be okay to see the lawyer. So I see this wonderful woman named Hazel Land. And she listened to my story. Here's another moment of realizing what a privileged mindset I still had. But I told her the whole story and that I was now living with my parents. So she's taking notes and she's like, so your parents are supporting you? I said, well, they're not supporting me. I'm like, I mean, I'm paying for some groceries and stuff. She goes, "Are you paying rent?" "No." "You paying utilities?" "No." She goes, "They're supporting you." Like, I just had to laugh. We just both laughed at me, like at me coming from a very sheltered little space of, I don't know what I thought. Of course, they were supporting me. I was living there and they weren't making me pay anything because they could afford it at the time. So she was super nice. And after she heard the whole story and that I was like begging to please get help getting Social Security, she said the same kind of thing. She had the same kind of attitude Dr. Komaroff did of like, "I'm looking at you and I get it." She said, you were in a big city that you loved. You were doing work that you loved. You were traveling and you loved it. You were doing this, she listed all these things I had told her about before I got sick. And now you're here in Brooksville, Florida, just, begging for the opportunity to have a little cash coming in. She goes, "I don't think you want to be here living with your parents. I don't think you're trying to get away with something, pretending to be sick. So you have a big problem. Like you have a bad illness and you wouldn't be here if you didn't have to be. You wouldn't have left that life for this life if you didn't have to." She goes, "I'm going to take your case." Bless your heart. It's like another one, just when somebody got it and supported me. So she was awesome. And we were in the room with the judge and she was taking up for me and giving him all my information. And he would ask me some questions. And at one point I started crying because I was just so scared. The thought that this guy could say yes or no, would I have any money coming in? And I didn't know what I was going to do if he said no. He asked me why I was crying and I said that. So I'm so scared. This is just so important. I don't know what to do. And then she started to bring up more stuff and he goes, "That's okay. I've heard enough. She looks tired to me." So that was the end of that meeting. And then I don't know how long it took. Shortly thereafter, I was approved. And I had my big $400 a month coming in. And it was like 1988 by then, I think. So it went a little farther than it would have today, but it still wasn't very much money. But again, me, ever hopeful, thinking about the future and trying to rebuild my life like the good little scout that I was. After 2 years with my parents, I was like, oh, I met some people I met some people who were involved in that reevaluation counseling group that I was in, who lived in Gainesville. And they said, "Come on up and visit us. You'll probably like it here. It's very laid back. Like people live here with disabilities. You can drive to places and park and walk right in. It's not like trying to deal with subways and walking miles to get anywhere. And it's cool. And there's a university and there's art and music." So I started visiting them and I thought maybe I can do this and maybe I won't go back to Boston for now anyway. And I eventually let my subletter take my apartment. I got a place to live. Someone they knew was looking for a roommate, so I had my first place to live. It's always been a thread through this whole process that poverty was a far bigger problem than the illness itself. The illness was no effing joke, but that I never had enough money to make really good decisions about the kind of place I lived, places where I could control the temperature so it wouldn't be too hot and make my muscles more tired, or too cold, and it's not usually a problem in Florida, but or be able to afford the help that I needed. I mean, it was mind blowing when I realized, the first time I realized, well, I could be getting all this done if I could just pay someone to do the heavy stuff, the hard stuff. Um, and sometimes I have been able to do that. And I did make a million friends in Gainesville who were very supportive and got help over the years in different ways. As you know, have taken me in when I was going through another tough time with a relationship. But getting Social Security definitely made it possible. At least then I had Medicare too. Although whatever it was, 2 years in between getting Social Security and getting the Medicare coverage were hair raising because I had no insurance at all, and every little thing that happened was terrifying. How to pay for that. Social Security isn't enough. Somehow, just had to move a lot to be in different situations. And that takes a lot of energy and a lot of time. But I've been in Gainesville for over 30 years now. Still wish I could move to a different place that had a better climate because the heat is really a problem for me. And I'm very, very sad over not having the seasons. But I've gotten over, mostly over losing that life that I had. I did get in what was a really wonderful relationship for many years. We're not together like that anymore, but at least we're still friends and very supportive to each other. That was a sweet spot when first I finally got some public housing assistance and did have an apartment by myself for a few years. And I started being in that relationship, and that was good. And then we moved in together, and that was very sweet for a while. And I really, when I had that support and could stay put for a freaking minute, I was able to start doing things with my life that were meaningful again. I mean, I did some artwork, but mostly just, not just, but I didn't get back to painting and showing my work all over the place, but I did teach drawing a little bit at the community ed place. And I did some pencil drawing of people's homes for commissions, and then started doing some portraits. Again, when I had the support of living in your house, dear Sherry. When I was in that relationship and sharing a home with him, I started a support network for people who have chronic illness, mainly chronic fatigue syndrome, but lots of other people started coming because it was a good support network. I had skills. I had good counseling skills to be able to listen to people and give people some time to talk about feelings and what was hard about their lives with the different symptoms and situations they had in their lives with different chronic illness or with chronic fatigue syndrome. And we had speakers and we had videos and we had good meetings and a really good telephone support network. People really talked to each other, and I took calls all the time, and it was very meaningful for me. At that point, I felt like I had learned a lot, and I had kind of gotten myself established in this new life. Finally, I mean, just years and years of struggle to get that far. I didn't want people who were just being diagnosed or not, who clearly had uh, CFIDS, is what we called it for many years, chronic fatigue immune dysfunction syndrome. The people who were new to it and not getting the support they needed from their medical uh, health providers. I didn't want them to go through as tough a process as I had. And it really gave me a lot of joy to have long conversations on the phone, have people tell me their stories, be able to direct them to different um, resources that I knew about. There was a great National CFIDS Association then. It's changed a little bit now, but they put out really excellent journals every quarter and newsletters, and they had a ton of resources. You could order, we had all kinds of pamphlets for doctors, pamphlets for patients, tips for, like occupational therapy type instruction for how to organize your house so it's easier to navigate and safer for you if you have weak muscles. Just that was 10 full years. And then I really wanted to do other things. It was a very big commitment of my time and energy. And I was ready to start doing some other things and tried to get some other leadership to step up. And everybody else was just too tired and didn't really have the reason. I mean, I think they could have done a great job, but they didn't have the confidence that I had, that I had resources to fall back on. I had help. My boyfriend was the computer guy, and he got me all set up so I had a database of addresses, and I could print out labels, and I could send out mailings. And, we had a whole little office going just for the group. But so it kind of petered out at that point, except that I retained some really good friends from it. We tried to do mailings to doctors. I don't know what you would call that. We were trying to raise their consciousness. We still heard some terrible horror stories about doctors in Gainesville who were very abusive to patients with CFIDS, really either physically or emotionally, because they didn't believe in it. That was the phrase back then. Doctors seemed to think that they had the option of not believing in it, like it was a faith-based situation.
Mhm.
When there really was so much research in Boston and North Carolina and London. I mean, the world was really, really improving its understanding of the illness, but not all doctors were. So it was a struggle, and it still is. But personally, when that ended, I just felt really creative again. Like I still had that kind of stability of a home that I didn't have to leave, and a decent relationship. And I had a lot of creative energy come back. I didn't have to do everything by myself. There was somebody who was happy to take out the trash, for example. I had support. And I realized that I wanted to write, that it was so much work to paint. That's another thing that was really funny about this as an artist. I see so many people who, when they become disabled or have a chronic illness, they start doing artwork. Like, oh, now I'm doing watercolors now, and because it's just like relaxing and it makes me happy, and I can't do any real work because I'm disabled, but I can do this. Like, I can't. I mean, one of the saddest things I ever found was this little backpack that had gone with me when I took a trip up to New England to finally empty out my apartment so my subletter could finally really make it her own. She was very patient about that. And I spent some time in Maine, and I kept thinking, well, I can be here. I was staying with somebody up there, and maybe I could paint. And I still had all these materials. And I kept trotting out to these little places where I was going to paint landscapes and would just collapse and shove everything back in the backpack and barely make it back to the house. And would never have the energy to clean my brushes. That was the big symbol to me. It's like I could never do enough painting to get past those first mistakes that you make while you get to what you want to get to, you know? And it's just so frustrating. Like, I don't want to just do crappy paintings that are just the first things that come out. You know, I know what I want to do, and that's not it. Like, that would just be, I'd rather do something completely different than to do that. You know, I don't want to do bad things just for fun. I want to do what I wanted to do. And then even if you did get to the point where you got the painting made that you wanted to make, or the progress you wanted to make that day, then you still had to like wash the damn brushes. Even if it's watercolor, you got to rinse them out. And that was like moving my arm and my hand. Somebody asked me that recently. It's like, I don't see why you can't paint though. Like, it's arm movement and body movement, and you have to keep doing it for like a long time. And then you have to wash the fucking brushes. Like, I can't do it. Sorry, everybody. So I started writing. I started writing poetry, and I got in the most wonderful writers group. Again, made a whole bunch of wonderful friends. But the longer you live, the more people die. I mean, at this age, a lot of those friends are gone, or some moved. I still have good friends here, but anyway, that's a long life.
And what about now?
Well, okay, so after the writers group, more chaos when that relationship ended. That was a long one though. That was a good one. It had some fatal problems, but as it turned out. But okay, so chaos lived with you for quite a while. Got back into finally got back on the list to get public housing, and found an apartment of my own in a building that's all HUD funded public housing assistance. And this has been another just trip down a completely different kind of a completely different road. It's a blessing for sure to have a place of my own. It's also hard in ways. It's a little bit difficult mentally to be in a place that is all like every apartment is people who are elderly or disabled. You kind of lose sight of feeling vital yourself. It's easy. I mean, you have to kind of work at being vital, not feeling like you're on your last legs. But it can be a very supportive community too. it wasn't long after I was here when the mayor was looking for someone to be on the board of commissioners of the housing authority locally, which then owned this building and ran this building. And I did know already of some deep problems there, and where some changes needed to be made so that this building and all their other properties could be run better for the residents. And I was asked by the mayor to take the seat of, or one of the resident commissioner seats. Turns out someone else who was a friend of mine from the support network, the Seafood Support Network, was living in a different building then, and it was HUD-funded, and she was the other resident commissioner, and it was the first time they had had two resident commissioners on this board of 5 commissioners. And it was not pretty. She and I had a lot to learn, and we stumbled around a lot. And she was the ballsy one who just didn't care. She just didn't care. She was going to go for it, whatever it was. And I was the one who was maybe had a little more finesse, but not much. But, between the two of us, we got a lot of changes made, and then those changes got changed, and then that was another very, very tough, the toughest job I've ever had. It wasn't a paid job, but as a volunteer. But it was very, very rewarding to learn and get better at it. And by my 4th year, I stayed on an extra year, but then I was done. I was asked to be the chair of the board, and it was the first time that a resident in public housing here had ever been the chair of the board of commissioners. So that felt like an accomplishment. Although I had a lot, that brought me there that a lot of people don't have. A lot of people don't feel confident in their education and their place at a meeting, based on their life experience thus far, where I felt pretty good about that. But it was still, it was quite an experience. But what ended up was that this building needed to be sold. And we spent a year looking for a good company to buy it who wouldn't just renovate it and flip it into some kind of more lucrative apartment building. And we got that. We fought hard for a deed restriction, so they can't flip this building for at least 20 years, but that is like 8 years ago now already. So the future is still out there. Who knows if we can keep this building the way it should be. It's 101 apartments. It's a great place really to have. It's an affordable place to be downtown. And the company that bought it did do a ton of renovation, including the new central heat and air, which is my favorite thing I've ever had in any place I've ever lived. It was inadequate at air conditioning before. So a lot of good improvements to the building, and I get to still live here. So things are stable for now. And I'm old. I don't know what else should I say? What else? I still have symptoms. It hasn't gone away.
Yes.
And we still need to find the cure. And they have learned a lot about obscure things about it that they can't just fix, but they can see markers, genetic markers that show how certain aspects of certain elements of the energy factories within cells, how they're producing the wrong material. They're not. I mean, there definitely is a problem in our energy metabolism, cell metabolism, and creation of muscle energy. I'm not describing it at all well, but if anybody's interested in learning more, there is a national organization called, ME/CFS. The ME, again, stands for myalgic encephalomyelitis. I mean, a lot of people have a lot of brain involvement. Different people do have some more prominent symptoms that vary from person to person. Mine has always been the muscle weakness is the worst. I'm trying to think of the name of it. Anyway, if you look up MECFS for the cure, it's something like that is the national organization now. And they do have educational materials and online support networks. We're still trying. We still have hope that they can. But right now, the people who are having the long hauler syndrome after having the COVID virus, this is basically what we've had all along is basically a long hauler syndrome from a severe viral infection or environmental disruption of our immune system, like toxin induced CFS. But we had something was disrupted in our a lot of systems in our body that created long-term havoc, basically. And I'm afraid people who have long-term symptoms left over from COVID might be fighting a similar battle eventually. And it might be that the people studying COVID will figure out a solution that helps them and helps us as well. It could be, it's probably related, is what they're saying. I'm sorry, I've been talking a long time and I'm getting even more inarticulate.
Thank you so much.
Anything you want to add?
I think that you've really covered everything and given us a good resource. And I appreciate you so much.
Well, thank you so much for your patience